Hey kids, it's trivia time. Sorry about that. This episode brings us adaptations of two familiar game shows. Now, we've already seen these shows adapted for NES, but this time around, they're adapted for kids. Well, that's what Junior Edition in these titles implies. It's like a baby game. Except not really. I'm not exactly sure what makes this a Junior Edition, except that it appears to have fewer puzzle solutions that you'd need to have been age 40 or older in 1989 to be able to guess. I don't think a lot of 9-year-olds were particularly aware of a Clockwork Orange, for example. Well, at least I hope they weren't. There were lots of solutions in the original release of Wheel of Fortune that felt geared toward an older audience, which made sense given that it was the kind of game that would have appealed to more than just tweens. Television board game adaptations existed as bridge titles for NES, like Tetris, spanning the gap between the main demographics that Nintendo targeted with its marketing, that is, children, and the people who actually spent their money on the console and its games, which is to say, parents. Your mom and dad may have been leery of investing in a system that did nothing but let their children punch and shoot guys all day long, but a system that could allow them to test their intellect on national TV against a plumber and an architect, both with a PhD? That's the kind of value proposition that made the NES seem like a strong, viable product for sitting alongside the family TV. But the original version of Wheel of Fortune was tilted pretty heavily toward a more adult demographic. No, I'm not talking about Vanna White's low-cut dress. This isn't that kind of games console. I mean that the solutions to the original Wheel of Fortune's hangman puzzles skewed older, toward people who had functional memories of the 1960s and 70s, could legally drink alcohol, and who had navigated the miserable world of paying a mortgage. Chances are pretty good that a tween in 1989 did not know, for example, the name Billie Jean King, unless they, say, owned a lot of Peanuts comics collections. And what 10-year-old should ever have to know terms like claims adjuster or lacerated contusion? A fourth grader definitely has no business knowing about the classic bar combo beer and pretzels. And certainly Ms. Lowry's second grade class did not expect children to learn selections from Porgy and Bess during choir times. And so, Wheel of Fortune Junior Edition, an adaptation of Wheel of Fortune that emphasizes questions that American children between the ages of 7 and 12 could reasonably be expected to know. Of course, adults certainly would have been familiar with these puzzle solutions as well, so mom and dad versus child contests would still put the little one at a sharp disadvantage. But at least it wouldn't feel quite so unfair. Beyond its revised contents, Wheel of Fortune Junior Edition looks, sounds, and functions almost entirely identically to the original release of Wheel of Fortune. That's not a bad thing, since developer Rare Limited did a bang-up job with their adaptation. It was a great conversion of the TV show, with 3 rounds of play per game, revolving around the wheel the players spin in order to determine the value of a successful guess as they attempt to fill out a blank hangman grid by selecting consonants and cashing in $200 a pop to fill in vowels. Play cycles between the 3 competitors, a mix of CPU opponents and humans, in a pass-the-controller format, with correct guesses allowing players to spin the wheel again. Guess a letter not present in the puzzle on the board, or land the wheel at an unlucky slot like bankrupt or lose a turn, and play, which is to say control of the wheel, passes to the next contestant. Winning Wheel of Fortune requires a bit of luck, a bit of smarts, and a bit of strategy. It's entirely possible to have a great run of the wheel and lock up a ton of cash only for an unlucky spin to send play to the next person in line, who can win on a single spin thanks to your hard work in revealing letters for them. Of course, there is the question of whether it's worth it for the competitor to solve the puzzle with so little cash in the bank, or if it's better for them to risk a few more spins and hope to rack up more prize money before solving. Whichever contestant holds the most money at the end of 3 rounds moves along to the final puzzle, where they guess 5 consonants and a vowel, and then just have a few seconds to deduce the solution based on whichever letters end up being revealed this way. Rare captured all of this, all the way down to allowing players to pick which fabulous prize they could compete for in the final round. So it makes sense for them not to change much of anything. It's basically just the same game with a new set of puzzles. The kind of thing that would probably be a DLC expansion pack these days. But that didn't exist in the NES era. Even the Famicom modem was just used for banking and stuff, not downloading extra content for existing carts. And just because it's called Junior Edition, doesn't mean that there's no challenge here. This Wheel of Fortune release includes 3 different difficulty levels, and the highest difficulty level absolutely will kick your ass up one side and down the other. It's the kind of game where the CPU competitors will solve puzzles before you ever have a chance to spin the wheel, meaning that you can potentially lose the entire game watching passively after losing control of the wheel on your first turn. But it's good to teach kids about these harsh realities. As a wise man said on TV around the time this game shipped,
"It is possible to commit no mistakes and still lose. That is not a weakness. That is life."
So here we have Rare Limited in keeping the lights on mode. I'm not sure exactly how they were tapped to be the sole provider of board game and game show conversions for NES, but honestly, they're doing about as well with the material as you could expect from anyone. Now, eventually, someone other than Rare would be tapped to make game show adaptations. High-Tech Expressions contracted with Rydell Software Productions to produce the NES version of MTV's Remote Control, and Rare's hammerlock on the genre would be shattered the following year. Shattered, I say. But for now, well, Rare is doing okay. Like Wheel of Fortune Junior Edition, Jeopardy Junior Edition amounts to a near-total recycling effort that repurposes existing code for an adaptation of the television game show geared toward kids. Again, by geared toward kids, what I mean is that Jeopardy Junior Edition simply emphasizes questions that would be manageable for someone under the age of 40. Heck, in my recording and play sessions, I got I got answers about American television shows that were running concurrently with the game's release. This makes it very much a time capsule of a trivia game that works best for someone born between 1970 and 1980. But speaking as a member of that demographic, you won't hear me complain. At the same time, the pop culture categories conspicuously skirted around the names of deceased actors, long-abandoned television shows, or products that had been discontinued in the 1960s. I certainly didn't see every single category or question in the cartridge during my play and recording, and it's entirely possible that there was a whole cache of questions about Ethel Merman, What's My Line, and Maypo lurking in code, waiting to strike the moment I let my guard down. But overall, Rare, or whoever fed them answers and questions, did a great job of picking trivia tuned to their specific audience. And that's not to say that Jeopardy Junior Edition was just brain-dead rot that assumed children were television zombies. There's quite a bit of historic and scientific trivia that operates around the belief that its players would have actually paid attention in class. I landed an entire category about volcanoes, which is both highly specific and pleasantly science-based. Jeopardy Junior Edition builds on the framework, by which I mean completely reuses the graphics and program code, of 1988's Jeopardy, but it calls the questions that a 9-year-old had no hope of coming up with. As with Wheel of Fortune, Jeopardy Junior Edition supports 1 to 3 players, including a solo, non-competitive mode that you could use for training, by which I mean running through all of the answers to memorize them so that you could have an unfair and highly focused advantage at your next slumber party. The CPU can be set to 3 different difficulty levels, which determine the likelihood that a computer challenger will buzz in and answer correctly. Jeopardy likes to give the player a fighting chance by causing the CPU to provide wrong answers, but a blown answer is always a string of random junk text that sometimes includes a partial hint to the correct answer. Really though, anyone with the ability to read quickly can curb stomp the CPU, since the game always gives you a reasonable amount of time to read and process the answer before anyone buzzes in. I could see where a first grader who's still struggling with Reader Rabbit might have a rough time with even the lowest difficulty setting, but I kind of feel like Jeopardy is a self-selecting topic where people who aren't big into trivia and literature aren't going to be playing anyway. The main drawback of this 8-bit adaptation is that, obviously, Jeopardy Junior lacks any sort of voice synthesis for reading the answers aloud, which does put players with dyslexia and other language processing difficulties at a disadvantage. Despite the unavoidable drawbacks of putting a game like this on a console like this, Jeopardy Junior Edition is a nice reminder that some game publishers and developers did understand the nature of the core NES audience and would calibrate their media licenses to match. The fact that Rare seemingly just took the existing codebase for its NES Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune and crammed new puzzles into the text sections does feel a little flimsy, but for me it's the kind of thing you're willing to allow once. Again, patches and DLC didn't exist in 1989, so why reinvent the wheel, as it were? The march of technology and dissemination of more powerful NES memory management chips will make the entire prospect of recycling AN-ROM code like this totally unacceptable once the calendar flips us into 1990. But for the moment, we can marvel at the fact that the first ever roster update release for NES wasn't tied to a sports game, but rather to the spiritual opposite: contests of brain, not body. Now, over in the Japanese market, publishers had already fallen into a pattern of releasing barely updated annual iterations of their baseball games by this point. Besides being a nightmare of carbon copy crap, for anyone mad enough to attempt to chronicle the entire history of the Famicom, this surely helped accelerate the devaluation of that console's standing in the eyes of fans. Eventually, publishers would start cranking out wild solutions, like custom pass-through cartridges that could accept plug-in data update minicards to reduce the cost of team roster revisions. Thankfully, the game show market never quite reached that point on NES. There would only be one additional Jeopardy release and 2 more Wheels of Fortune for NES. Which is to say that neither series was quite as aggressive about annual updates as Mega Man. And everyone loves Mega Man, right? So we can probably cut Rare and High-Tech Expressions some slack. For the moment. Next time on NES Works, a young loner on a crusade to champion the cause of the innocent, the helpless, the powerless on my NES?